The air was thick with the kind of humid, pre-thunderstorm tension that makes your shirt stick to your back. But the electricity crackling between me and the woman in front of me had nothing to do with the weather. Her name was Brenda, and she was standing, arms crossed, a human roadblock in front of her ridiculously oversized, gleaming white Range Rover. The car, in turn, was parked diagonally, perfectly blocking the rusted metal gate that was the only way up the ridge. "I have told you," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss that was probably meant to be intimidating. "You are not passing. This is private property." Behind me, the diesel engine of a Ford F-350 rumbled impatiently. Inside sat Gary, a man whose entire personality was a weary sigh, and his nephew Kyle, who was currently bouncing in the passenger seat like a golden retriever who just heard the word walk. I offered Brenda what I hoped was a serene, calming smile. Internally, I was composing a symphony of creative insults. "Hi, Brenda. Lovely morning, isn't it? As I was saying, we have full permission to be here. If you could just move your vehicle, we'll be out of your hair in a few hours." She laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. It was the sound a hawk makes before it eviscerates a field mouse. "I have already called the police. Again. They're on their way to arrest you for trespassing, harassment, and for threatening me." From the truck, Gary's voice, dry as desert sand, drifted over. "Threatening you? Lady, the only thing he's threatened so far is my patience. Kyle, you got the big tow chains? I want to see if this thing's really all-wheel drive." Kyle, bless his simple, beautiful heart, actually started rummaging in the truck bed. "Awesome!" Brenda's face went from pale rage to blotchy crimson. She stabbed at her phone with a perfectly manicured finger. "Officers! He's threatening my vehicle! You need to get here now!" I just stood there, holding a simple manila folder. My heart was thumping, sure, but it was the excited thrum of a V8 engine, not the frantic flutter of a cornered bird. Because what Brenda didn't know, what the entire Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association didn't know, was that this wasn't just a dispute between a nerdy hobbyist and a power-tripping HOA president anymore. She thought she was fighting me. In reality, she had just picked a fight with the United States federal government, and I had the paperwork to prove it. The distant wail of a siren grew closer. Brenda's smile was pure, smug triumph. My own smile was genuine. It was showtime. But to understand how I, Alex Carter, a reasonably sane IT consultant, ended up in a high-stakes standoff at the gates of beige utopia, you have to go back 6 weeks, to a time of innocence and hope. A time before I learned the true terrifying depths of HOA madness. It all started, as most of my best and worst ideas do, in my basement. My basement is not a damp, spider-filled cave from a horror movie. Well, it's not just that. It's my sanctuary, my command center, my shack, in ham radio parlance. One wall is covered in pegboard, neatly holding coils of coax cable, soldering irons, and tools that would look more at home in a 1960s spy movie than a suburban home. The centerpiece is a large wooden desk, groaning under the weight of metal boxes covered in knobs, dials, and glowing LCD screens. The low, almost silent hum of cooling fans and the faint, clean scent of ozone is the official smell of my happy place. This is where I indulge my passion. Amateur radio. Go ahead, get the chuckle out of your system. Picture a guy in a cardigan talking about his gout to another guy in a different cardigan 1,000 miles away. I get it. But for me, it's magic. It's the raw science of pulling a voice out of the static, of bouncing a signal off the ionosphere to talk to someone in a country I can only dream of visiting. It's the original social media, except instead of arguing with your uncle about politics, you're swapping antenna designs with a retired fisherman in Japan. It's just better. And the biggest event in the North American ham radio calendar was coming up, the ARRL Field Day. For 48 consecutive hours, thousands of clubs and individuals across the continent set up temporary stations in parks, fields, and mountaintops, and try to contact as many other stations as possible. It's a contest, a technical challenge, and a giant nerdy party all rolled into one. For me, it was the Super Bowl. And this year, I wasn't just competing, I was going for the gold. My plan was ambitious, glorious, and just a little bit crazy. I wanted to install a permanent repeater on The Ridge, the highest point in the county. A repeater is basically a supercharged relay station. My little handheld radio, which can normally only talk a few miles, could hit the repeater. And the repeater, with its big antenna and powerful transmitter, would blast my signal out over a 70-mile radius. It would be a game changer for every ham in the region. I was explaining this with wild, enthusiastic gestures to my girlfriend, Sarah, as she brought me a peace offering in the form of a coffee mug. She watched me, a familiar look of loving amusement on her face. "So, let me get this straight," she said, leaning against a rack of servers I'd salvaged from an office cleanout. "You're going to spend a small fortune and countless hours to put a giant antenna on a mountain, just so you can spend 2 days in a tent talking to strangers on your magic radio." "It's not a magic radio, it's a highly sophisticated Kenwood TMD 710 GA transceiver," I corrected, pointing at the box in question. "And yes, but not just for fun, for glory." "Uh-huh, glory," she deadpanned. "Just try not to get into another turf war with the squirrels. They won last time, remember? Chewed right through your main coax." "That was a tactical retreat to secure a better strategic position," I grumbled, making a note to buy armored cable. "This time will be different. It's all buttoned up. I got written permission from the broadcast company that owns the tower. They haven't used it for anything but a cell carrier lease in 20 years. They were happy for someone to do some maintenance. I've got my FCC license, my schematics are perfect, the equipment is all tested. Sounds like you've thought of everything." "Almost everything," I said, my good mood deflating just a tiny bit. "There's just one tiny, little, insignificant hurdle." "There always is," she said, sipping her own coffee. "The only access road to the tower skirts the edge of that new housing development. You know, the one where every house is a slightly different shade of taupe?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Oh no, not Whispering Pines Estates." "The very same." "Alex, those people are intense. My friend Jessica lives there. She said they have a 30-page rulebook that dictates the exact species of grass you're allowed to plant." "It'll be fine," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "I'm not planting grass. I'm just driving a truck up a road that, technically, isn't even their property. What could they possibly do?" Oh, my sweet summer child of a past self. You had no idea. A few days later, I drove my trusty, slightly dented Honda Civic out to Whispering Pines for a preliminary site survey. The moment you pass the grand, ridiculous stone entrance gate, the world changes. The asphalt is jet black, smooth and perfect. The lawns are an impossible shade of green, manicured with a precision that would make a brain surgeon nervous. Every mailbox is identical. It was less a neighborhood and more a large-scale experiment in conformity. It gave me the creeps. The access road was exactly where the map said it would be, tucked behind a small, landscaped berm at the far end of a cul-de-sac. A simple, rusted chain-link gate with a heavy padlock blocked the way. Perfect. I parked, got out, and started taking a few pictures with my phone, making notes about the gate mechanism and the condition of the dirt road beyond it. I was so focused on my task that I didn't hear her approach. It was the yapping that gave her away. A series of high-pitched, frantic squeaks that sounded like a dog toy being murdered. I turned around. There, on the pristine sidewalk, stood a woman in a matching set of Lululemon athleisure wear that probably cost more than my car's transmission. She was holding the leash of a tiny, white, fluffy creature that was having a full-blown existential crisis at my presence. The woman, however, was perfectly still, staring at me with an intensity that could curdle milk. "Can I help you?" The words were technically a question, but the tone was pure accusation. It was the tone you use when you find a raccoon going through your garbage can. I immediately switched into friendly, harmless nerd mode. "Oh, hey there, just doing a little survey work. Sorry if my car is in the way." She didn't smile. Her eyes flicked from my face to my slightly scuffed boots, to my Civic, and back to my face. Each stop on the journey seemed to deepen her disapproval. "Survey work for what?" she asked. "I've got permission to do some work up on the big radio tower," I said, pointing up the ridge. "Super excited about it. It's for an amateur radio project." I might as well have told her I was opening a rendering plant. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed. "Work?" she repeated, as if the word itself was offensive. "What kind of work? We have very strict rules here at Whispering Pines. Rules about commercial activity, and noise, and frequencies." She said the word frequencies like it was a contagious disease. "Oh, it's totally non-commercial," I assured her, my smile starting to feel strained. "It's a hobby, amateur radio. All the frequencies are federally licensed by the FCC and are perfectly safe. Safer than the Wi-Fi coming out of your house, I promise." This was, apparently, the wrong thing to say. "You're an amateur?" she sniffed. "So you don't actually know what you're doing. I see." Before I could defend the noble history of amateur radio, she steamrolled on. "Well, any and all external modifications or significant contractor work that utilizes community access must be approved by the Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee. You'll need to submit a full proposal." "The Architectural Review Committee?" I blinked. "For an antenna, I'm putting on an existing 300-foot tower that you can't even see from here?" "Rules are rules," she said, giving a sharp tug on the leash of the trembling dog. "I would know. I'm the HOA president." Of course you are, I thought. My internal monologue was already firing on all cylinders. Of course you're the president. You probably wake up in the morning and fine your husband for leaving his socks on the floor. Does the Architectural Review Committee also have jurisdiction over the color of the sky? Your Highness. Externally, I kept my smile plastered on. Right, of course, an HOA. Makes sense. Well, Madam President, you'll be getting a very professional proposal from me shortly. Have a great day. I got back in my car, the sound of the yapping dog following me as I drove away. A slight sense of dread had begun to curdle the excitement in my stomach. Sarah was right. These people were intense. And I had just met their queen. No great endeavor is completed alone. Batman had Robin, Lewis had Clark. I had Gary and Kyle. I'd found their company, Ridgeline Communications, online. They had 5-star reviews and a portfolio of pictures showing them hanging off of terrifyingly tall structures in high winds. They were perfect. We agreed to meet at a local Greasy Spoon diner to go over the plans. Gary was exactly what you'd expect from a man who spends his days 1,000 feet closer to the sun than the rest of us. He was in his mid-50s, with a weathered face, a permanent squint, and a formidable beer gut that seemed to defy gravity. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, as if conserving energy for his next climb. He ordered a black coffee and a plate of bacon and communicated primarily through a series of grunts. His nephew, Kyle, was his polar opposite. He was barely in his 20s, with a shock of messy blonde hair and an energy level that suggested he mainlined Red Bull. He ordered a milkshake with extra whipped cream and a side of pancakes at 10 in the morning. Everything was either awesome, sick, or dude, no way. I unrolled my schematics on the sticky table, a diagram of the tower with my proposed antenna placement. Okay, I began, trying to sound professional. So, we'll be mounting a Diamond X 510 HNA vertical antenna at the 280-foot level. It needs to be clear of the main broadcast arrays and the cellular panels. The feed line will be LMR 600 coax, which will run down the existing conduit. Once that's done, I'll handle the ground-level stuff myself, aligning the duplexer, programming the controller, all that jazz. Kyle leaned in, his eyes wide. Whoa, a duplexer, sick! So you can transmit and receive on the same antenna at the same time? That's awesome. Gary didn't even look at the plans. He was staring out the window, slowly chewing a piece of bacon. Access road, he grunted. Paved? Gravel? Any tight turns? It's a dirt road, I said. Looks fairly well maintained, though. No major ruts. Should be easy for your truck. Gate. Standard padlock. The tower owner is mailing me the key. Gary finally turned his gaze from the window to me. It was like being examined by a hawk. You got permission? Yep, signed letter from the broadcast company. Insurance? $2 million liability policy. I have the certificate right here. He nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied. He took a long sip of his coffee. Then he delivered the million-dollar question. Any crazies? People living nearby? Weirdos who think radio waves are going to poison their vegetable garden? My heart sank. Well, there is an HOA. Gary let out a sigh. It was a long, weary, soul-deep sigh. The sigh of a man who had seen the dark heart of humanity and found it living in a planned community with a rule against non-beige mailboxes. He put his coffee cup down with a clatter. An HOA, he said, not as a question, but as a curse. Great, freaking fantastic, just what we needed. The president seemed a little particular, I admitted. Let me guess, Gary said, holding up a greasy finger. Blonde, drives a white SUV and looks at you like you just tracked mud on her all-white carpet? My jaw dropped. How did you know that? Kid, he said, leaning forward. There's one in every single one of these places. They're clones. They're mass-produced in a factory somewhere in Delaware. Listen to me and listen good. Get their permission in writing, on their official letterhead. Signed in blood if you can. I am not, and I repeat, not, getting my truck impounded or my business sued because some lady in yoga pants has a problem with unauthorized contractor vehicles. He's not kidding, dude, Kyle chimed in, suddenly serious. Last year, this one lady called the cops on us because she said our ladder was casting an oppressive shadow on her prize-winning roses. I'll get the permission, I said, trying to sound confident. I'm sending them a full proposal today. It's just a formality. Gary just grunted and went back to his bacon. Call us when the ink is dry. I left the diner with a schedule, a quote, and a growing sense of foreboding. The fate of my entire field day glory rested on a piece of paper from the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I really, really hoped it was just a formality. That afternoon, I sat down and composed what I considered to be a masterpiece of diplomacy. It was polite, professional, and preemptively answered every possible question a sane person could have. 2. Whispering Pines HOA_board@communitylink.net. From alex.carter.k. 1. ext@email.com. Subject, proposal for minor work at Ridge Transmission Tower. Access request. Dear Whispering Pines HOA Board and Madam President Brenda, my name is Alex Carter. Further to my brief conversation with the President, please accept this email as a formal proposal and request for temporary access via the Ridge Access Road for a small-scale, non-commercial project. The project involves the installation of a single, slender amateur radio antenna model, and specs attached, onto the existing broadcast tower. This is a personal hobby project for which I am fully licensed by the FCC, license attached. Key points. The work is fully permitted by the tower's owners, letter of permission attached. The installation will be performed by a licensed and insured professional crew, insurance certificate attached. The work will take approximately 6 hours on a single weekday. It will involve one work truck, which will adhere to all speed limits and be mindful of residents. The equipment is low power and poses absolutely no health risk per FCC and WHO guidelines. I've tentatively scheduled the work for 3 weeks from today and would be grateful for your written approval so I can confirm with my crew. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Alex Carter. FCC call sign K1AXT. I hit send, feeling proud of myself. It was perfect. Bullet points and everything. What kind of monster could say no to bullet points? 2 days later, I found out. 2. alex.carter.k1axt@email.com. From Whispering Pines HOA_board@communitylink.net. Subject: Proposal for minor work at Ridge Transmission Tower. Access request. Mr. Carter, the Whispering Pines. Architectural Review Committee has reviewed your unsolicited proposal. After careful consideration, we have decided to deny your request at this time. The denial is based on several factors, including, but not limited to, the potential for unmitigated and unstudied electromagnetic interference with residents' sensitive electronic appliances, including garage door openers, Wi-Fi networks, and medical devices. Concerns regarding the negative impact on the aesthetic harmony of the natural ridgeline, which is a key feature of our community's appeal. The unknown long-term health effects of concentrated, high-frequency radio transmissions in close proximity to a residential area. The precedent of allowing non-resident, heavy commercial vehicles to utilize our private roads for non-essential activities, posing a potential danger to our community's children and pets. The committee's decision is final. Regards, Brenda Maxwell, President, Whispering Pines HOA. I stared at the screen, my blood pressure climbing with every bullet point. I read it out loud to Sarah, my voice getting higher and more incredulous with each line. Aesthetic harmony? I sputtered, jumping up from my chair. It's a giant, rusty 300-foot metal stick that's been there since the Nixon administration. I'm adding a slightly smaller metal stick to the top of it. No one can even see the top from their houses. Did you tell them about the long-term health effects of their smart refrigerators that are probably spying on them for the Russians? Sarah asked, trying and failing to hide a smile. Unmitigated electromagnetic interference? I paced around the kitchen. Does she think I'm building a death ray? It's a 50-watt repeater. Her microwave oven kicks out more stray RF than my entire setup. The bit about the heavy commercial vehicles is my favorite, Sarah said. It's one truck, Alex. It's not a convoy of Panzer tanks. This is insane, I muttered, collapsing back into my chair. This is a declaration of war. My first instinct was to fire back a blistering, sarcastic reply. I typed out 3 different drafts. The first one called her a power-mad tyrant of a beige-colored fiefdom. The second included a detailed, scientifically accurate takedown of every one of her points, complete with citations. The third just said, "Are you kidding me?" in 72-point font. Wisely, I deleted them all. I took a deep breath and channeled my inner diplomat. To Whispering Pines OA_board@communitylink.net. From alex.carter.k1axt@email.com. Subject: Proposal for minor work. Dear Brenda, thank you for the prompt reply. I must admit I'm surprised by the decision and believe there may be some misunderstandings. I spent the next hour crafting a careful, point-by-point rebuttal. I attached FCC reports on RF safety. I included a photo simulation showing how my tiny antenna would be completely invisible from the ground. I promised the truck would be driven by a man who moved so slowly he was practically going backward in time. Her reply came back in less than 10 minutes. Mr. Carter, as stated previously, the decision is final. We do not feel the need to debate the finer points of RF safety with an amateur. Further correspondence on this matter is not necessary. Regards, Brenda. The politeness was gone. The gloves were off. This wasn't just about a repeater anymore. This was about principle. The battle of Whispering Pines had begun. If you can't win by email, you take the fight to them in person. That was my logic, anyway. It's harder for people to be unreasonable when you're standing right in front of them, smiling and being a rational human being. This logic, as it turns out, does not apply to HOA meetings. I found the date for their monthly meeting on their terribly designed website and showed up a few minutes early, dressed in what I call my inoffensive dad outfit. A polo shirt, clean jeans, and sneakers. The meeting was in the community clubhouse, a building so sterile and devoid of personality it felt like a waiting room for the afterlife. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and quiet desperation. About 15 residents were scattered around on folding chairs. I quickly cataloged the archetypes. There was an elderly man in a full tracksuit who looked like he was ready to filibuster about lawn gnome regulations. There was a young couple clutching each other in terror, who probably thought a neighbor's wind chimes were a harbinger of the apocalypse. And at a long table at the front, holding court, was Queen Brenda herself, flanked by a sad-looking treasurer and a secretary who was typing with furious intensity. Brenda saw me walk in. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before being replaced by a mask of cold professionalism. The meeting was an exercise in mind-numbing minutiae. A 20-minute debate on the approved shade of off-white for fence paint. A passive-aggressive presentation on the importance of hiding your garbage cans immediately after pickup. I felt my soul starting to leak out of my ears. Finally, Brenda announced, "We have one item of new business. Mr. Carter is here to appeal the Architectural Review Committee's recent decision." She looked at me. "You have 3 minutes. 3 minutes. To undo a lifetime of weaponized pettiness." I stood up, folder in hand, my polite smile feeling like a Halloween mask. "Thank you, Brenda, and the board," I began. "I know you're all busy, so I'll be brief. I'm just here to clear up a few misconceptions about my project." But before I could even get to my first point, Brenda cut me off. "For the benefit of the residents, the committee has prepared a brief presentation outlining our concerns." She clicked a button on her laptop. The projector screen behind her flickered to life. The title on the first slide read, "The Hidden Dangers in Our Backyard." What followed was the most insane, unscientific, fear-mongering slideshow I have ever witnessed. She showed blurry, menacing photos of gigantic cell tower complexes she'd clearly ripped from a Google image search for scary antennas. She put up slides with bullet points like unknown rays and electropollution. She showed a diagram of a human head with angry red lines zapping into its brain, labeled, "Your children's future." I stood there, my mouth hanging open in disbelief. This wasn't a meeting, it was a Salem witch trial, and I was the witch. When her monument to misinformation was finally over, she turned to me. "Your rebuttal?" I was flustered, but I tried my best. "Okay, well, first of all, none of those pictures are of the equipment I'm using. My antenna is about the size of a fishing pole. Second, the science on radio frequency safety is very well established." A hand shot up. It was the man in the tracksuit. "My brother-in-law's cousin, he lived near one of them big power lines, and he went bald at 30. Is this like that?" "No, sir," I said patiently. Electrical lines and radio waves are completely different things. Another hand. The terrified wife. I read an article online that said these signals can confuse the bees. What about the bees? And what if a terrorist uses your radio to do a terrorism? Ma'am, I can assure you, the bees will be fine. And the only thing I'll be coordinating is a schedule for talking to people about the weather in Ohio, I pleaded. It's a federally regulated service. It's perfectly safe. Brenda stepped in for the kill. So you say, but you are just an amateur. We, as a board, have a fiduciary duty to protect our residents from potential threats. We can't just take your word for it. She called for a vote. All in favor of upholding the committee's denial? Every hand in the room went up. Even the terrified couple raised theirs, albeit shakily. I was stunned into silence. I had walked in there armed with facts, science, and reason. I had walked out, tarred and feathered by ignorance and fear. As I did the walk of shame out of that clubhouse, my internal monologue, which had been uncharacteristically quiet, came roaring back to life. Okay, that's it. No more Mr. Nice Nerd. You want to play hardball, Brenda? Fine. Let's play hardball. The polite, reasonable Alex Carter had left the building. The determined, slightly unhinged Alex Carter was now in the driver's seat. And he was just getting started. My new strategy was one of peaceful, annoying persistence. If I couldn't get permission, maybe I could just exist near them until they gave in. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all I had. A few days after the meeting from hell, I found myself drawn back to the scene of the crime. I drove my Civic back to Whispering Pines and parked on the public street, a good 50 feet from the access road gate. I didn't even get out of the car. I just sat there, looking at the gate, sipping a lukewarm coffee from a gas station, and wallowing in my defeat. It was a beautiful, sunny day, and my mood was as black as my coffee. I was so lost in thought that I didn't see the curtain twitch in the window of the beige McMansion directly across the street, the house that belonged to Brenda. But she saw me, and she did what any rational, level-headed community leader would do. She called the cops. I knew something was up when a pristine white and blue police cruiser swung into the cul-de-sac and pulled up slowly behind me. The flashing lights weren't on, but the sheer presence of the car made my stomach clench. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. I watched in my rearview mirror as two officers got out. The first was young, with a fresh-faced, earnest look that screamed rookie. He adjusted his belt and walked towards my driver's side window with a stiff, by-the-book posture. The second officer was older, with the weary, patient eyes of a man who had seen every form of human stupidity at least twice. He hung back by the cruiser, arms crossed, just watching. The rookie tapped on my window. I powered it down with a sigh. "Good morning, sir," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Officer Miller. We received a call about a suspicious vehicle that's been parked here for some time. What's your business in Whispering Pines today?" I couldn't help but let out a short, bitter laugh. "Let me guess. The call came from a woman in a white Range Rover? About 5'6", blonde hair? Looks like she's permanently smelling something foul." Officer Miller blinked, taken aback. The older officer, however, pushed himself off the cruiser and started to walk over, a flicker of interest on his face. "You seem to know the complainant, sir," he said. His name tag read SGT Davis. "You could say we're acquainted," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "This is about the radio tower. I promise you I'm not casing the neighborhood, unless you count casing my own disappointment as a crime." Sergeant Davis rested a hand on the roof of my car and leaned down slightly. He had a calm, disarming demeanor. "Why don't you start from the beginning, son?" So I did. I told them everything. My ham radio hobby, the field day contest, the permission from the tower owner, the HOA, the emails, the disastrous meeting. I spoke for 5 minutes straight, a torrent of frustrated nerd rage. Through it all, Davis listened patiently, his expression unreadable, while Miller just looked increasingly confused. When I was done, I handed them my folder through the window. Here, my driver's license, FCC license, the letter from the tower company. It's all in there. Sergeant Davis took the folder and flipped through the documents. He read my FCC license carefully. He examined the letter from the broadcast company. A slow, small smile started to form at the corners of his mouth. He looked up at the giant tower on the ridge, then back at my paperwork, then at me. K1AXT, huh? He said, reading my call sign. My dad was a ham. K1 Niner Juliet Victor. Spent half my childhood listening to him talk to people in Brazil on a long wire antenna he threw up in a pine tree. I felt a surge of relief, so profound it almost made me dizzy. No kidding? Yep, he said, handing the folder back. So let me get this straight. You have federal permission to be on that tower, you have the property owner's permission to be on that tower, and the only thing stopping you is the homeowners association. That's the long and short of it, Sergeant. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He turned to Miller, who still looked lost. Miller, what law is he breaking by parking his legally registered vehicle on a public street? None, Sarge, Miller stammered. That's what I thought. He then looked me square in the eye. His amusement was gone, replaced by a dose of weary wisdom. Look, son, you're not breaking any laws right now, but I'm going to give you some free advice. That HOA, they've got nothing but time and money. They will make your life a living hell over this. So be smart. Don't give them a reason to call us again. Go home. Figure out a different angle. A legal one? With that, he gave a nod, and the two of them walked back to their cruiser. But they didn't leave. Instead, they drove the 50 feet to Brenda's driveway, got out, and walked up to her front door. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Brenda's frantic, indignant gestures and Sergeant Davis's calm, unmoving posture. After a few minutes, the officers left, and Brenda slammed her front door so hard I thought the windows would shatter. It was a small victory, a tiny moral boost. But Sergeant Davis's words echoed in my head. Figure out a different angle, a legal one. He was right. It was time to stop fighting with emotion and start fighting with the law. The next few days were bleak. I called Gary to give him the bad news. HOA shot me down, in person. Then they called the cops on me for just sitting in my car, I said into the phone, the words tasting like ash. Gary's sigh was so heavy I think it lowered the barometric pressure in my basement. Told you so, kid. Told you they were clones from a factory of misery. Listen, my offer stands. You get a court order or some other piece of paper that says I won't get my truck seized by a tiny blonde tyrant, you call me. Until then, good luck. He hung up. I was at my wit's end. My grand field day plan was in ruins. My beautiful, expensive repeater equipment sat on a shelf, gathering dust. I was about to wave the white flag. Sarah found me in the shack, slumped in my chair, staring blankly at a schematic for an antenna that would never be built. Hey, she said softly, putting a hand on my shoulder. You look like your dog just died. Worse, I mumbled. My dream just died, strangled by bureaucracy and beige paint swatches. Honey, it's just a contest, she said, trying to console me. It's not the end of the world. We can go camping that weekend instead. Real camping. No radios, no computers. Just you, me, and a million mosquitoes. She was right, of course. In the grand scheme of things, it was a silly, insignificant problem. But it wasn't about the contest anymore. It was about the principle of the thing. It was about the fact that this woman, this Brenda, had decided that her arbitrary, nonsensical rules were more important than anything else, and she was getting away with it. The injustice of it all was what really stung. "I know," I said, "but it's just so wrong." Dejected, I turned back to my computer. I didn't even know why, but I navigated to the FCC's Universal Licensing System database. It's a vast, clunky, government-issue website where every single radio license and transmitter in the country is registered. I typed in the coordinates for the tower on the ridge. The page loaded, full of technical data, call signs, and legal jargon. I was scrolling through it aimlessly, a digital form of self-flagellation. I saw the registrations for the FM broadcast station that used to be there, the licenses for the cellular carriers, standard stuff. And then I saw it. It was a single line of text, buried deep in the tower's own registration details, almost like an afterthought. A small, innocuous designation that 99% of people would scroll right past. Auxiliary designation, part of the Auxiliary Communication Service, ACS National Network. I stared at the screen. ACS. My heart started beating a little faster. I knew what that was. I was a member myself. It was a sister organization to Aries and Races, the Amateur Radio Emergency Service and the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. These are the volunteer groups that federal, state, and local emergency management agencies call upon when all other forms of communication fail. Earthquakes, hurricanes, massive blackouts. When phones are dead and the internet is gone, ham radio operators are the ones passing messages for the Red Cross, for FEMA, for local hospitals. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I started a new search, my previous despair replaced by a frantic, burgeoning hope. FCC preemption of local zoning, Aries Races. Link after link appeared. I clicked on the first one, a legal analysis. And there it was. The Holy Grail, the silver bullet. The ace I didn't even know I had up my sleeve. The Communications Act of 1934, an FCC ruling known as PRB-1, and another called the OTARD Rule, Over-the-Air Reception Devices Rule. I read, my eyes getting wider with every sentence. The language was dense and legalistic, but the message was crystal clear. In essence, these federal laws and rulings established a policy of federal preemption. They explicitly prohibited state and local governments, and any private covenants, conditions, or restrictions, that is, HOA rules, from passing ordinances that would prevent or unreasonably restrict a federally licensed amateur radio operator from installing and maintaining effective outdoor antennas. The rationale was simple. The federal government recognized that a robust amateur radio network was in the national interest, especially for emergency communications. The tower wasn't just a private structure. Its ACS designation made it a piece of critical national infrastructure. My project wasn't just a hobby. It was maintenance and improvement of that infrastructure. Brenda's rules about aesthetic harmony and unknown rays were legally, utterly, and completely void when stacked up against the weight of federal law. A slow, wicked, triumphant grin spread across my face. "Yes!" I shouted, startling myself. Sarah came running down the stairs. "What? What is it? Did you electrocute yourself?" "No," I said, spinning around in my chair, my face beaming. "Better. I found it, Sarah. I found the loophole." "A loophole?" "It's not even a loophole," I said, laughing. "It's the law. It's been the law since before she was born. She can't stop me. Her precious little HOA has no jurisdiction. It's a matter of national communications security." Okay, national communications security might have been a bit of a dramatic embellishment, but it wasn't entirely untrue, and it sounded incredibly official. I spent the next hour like a man possessed. I printed out the FCC tower registration page, highlighting the ACS designation. I printed the relevant sections of the Communications Act and PRB-1, highlighting the preemption clauses. And then, with a flourish, I opened a word processor and drafted a new cover letter. I titled it in bold 20-point Times New Roman, Notice of Federally Mandated Access for Maintenance of Critical Communications Security Infrastructure. Brenda wanted a war of paperwork? Fine. I was about to drop a legal nuke on her. The morning of the installation was overcast and gray, but I felt nothing but sunshine in my soul. I had my folder, my secret weapon, tucked safely on the passenger seat. I called Gary. "Gary, it's Alex. It's on. I have everything we need. Meet me at the gate at 9 a.m. sharp." There was a skeptical pause on the other end of the line. "You got the court order?" "I've got something better," I said, unable to keep the glee out of my voice. "Trust me." I heard him sigh, but there was a hint of curiosity in it this time. "All right, kid, we'll be there. This ought to be interesting." I arrived first and parked. A few minutes later, Gary and Kyle's F-350 rumbled into the cul-de-sac and pulled in behind me. As if on cue, a garage door across the street slid open, and the gleaming white Range Rover reversed out. Brenda was ready for battle. She drove her car not to the side of the road, but directly in front of the gate, parking it at a sharp angle that blocked any possibility of entry. She killed the engine, got out, and stood there, arms crossed, phone in hand, a smug little smirk on her face. She looked like a dragon guarding its horde of beige houses. Gary ambled up beside me, Kyle trailing behind him. "Well," Gary said, taking in the scene, "she ain't subtle. I'll give her that." "Dude, she totally blocked us in," Kyle whispered, a little too loudly. "That's so not cool." I took a deep breath, grabbed my folder, and walked towards her. This was it. The final showdown. "Hi, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice light and breezy. "Lovely morning, isn't it? As I was saying a few weeks ago, we have full permission to be here. If you could just move your vehicle, we'll be out of your hair in a few hours, and you can get back to whatever it is you do." Her smirk tightened into a sneer. "I knew it. I knew you'd be arrogant enough to try this. I have already called the police. I told them you were back, that you were trespassing, and that you were harassing me." I just smiled. "That's fine. I'd actually love to talk to them." This confused her. My lack of fear was short-circuiting her brain. She expected me to argue, to plead, to get angry. My calm cheerfulness was the one thing she wasn't prepared for. "You're threatening me," she finally sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I feel very threatened." It was at that moment that Gary, my cynical, glorious secret weapon, decided to chime in. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled towards his truck. "Hey, Kyle, forget the chains for now. Just get the big floor jack. We'll just lift up the back of her fancy SUV and swing it out of the way." "Awesome!" Kyle yelled back, a little too enthusiastically. Brenda's face, which had been pale with rage, was now turning a fascinating shade of blotchy crimson. She stabbed at her phone. "Officers! He's threatening my vehicle now. They're going to damage my car. You need to get here now." I heard the distant sound of a siren. It was getting closer. Brenda's smug look returned. The cavalry was coming to save her. I just stood there, clutching my manila folder, and waited. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. And the hammer of justice, in the form of a tired police sergeant who just wanted to finish his shift, was about to fall. The patrol car, the very same one from before, pulled into the cul-de-sac with a final, tired squeal of its siren. Sergeant Davis emerged from the driver's side, while Officer Miller got out of the passenger seat. Davis took one look at the scene. The blocked gate, the work truck, Brenda standing like a sentinel, and me smiling patiently. And he let out the most profound, soul-weary sigh I have ever had the privilege of witnessing. It was the sigh of a man who had stared into the abyss, and the abyss was a suburban cul-de-sac. Brenda immediately launched herself towards them, a whirlwind of righteous indignation. "Officer! Sergeant! Thank goodness you're here!" she cried, her voice quivering with fake fear. "Arrest this man! He's trespassing! He brought his goons to break the lock. They're threatening me. They're threatening to damage my car. I want to press charges." Sergeant Davis completely ignored her and walked straight over to me. He looked from me to Gary and Kyle, then back to me. "Don't tell me," he said, his voice flat. "Let me guess. She won't let you through." "That is the accurate gist of the situation, Sergeant," I replied, a grin playing on my lips. "However, since our last conversation, I took your advice. I went home and I found a different angle, a legal one. I have some new information for you." I handed him the manila folder. He took it with a skeptical look, but he opened it. His eyes scanned the first page, my bold typed cover letter. He grunted, unimpressed. Then he flipped the page. He saw the official FCC registration for the tower. His eyes narrowed slightly. He flipped again. He saw the sections of the Communications Act and PRB-1 that I had printed out, with my yellow highlighter marking the key phrases: federal preemption, prohibit or unreasonably restrict, and private covenants. I watched his face. It was a study in slow comprehension. His eyebrows, which had been furrowed in annoyance, slowly rose towards his hairline. He read the highlighted section again. Then he looked up at the tower, then back at the paper, and then at me. The last traces of skepticism in his eyes vanished, replaced by a look of dawning, shocked respect. He turned to his rookie. "Miller," he said, his voice now carrying a new weight. "Come here. You need to read this." Miller dutifully read the documents over his sergeant's shoulder. His young face was a mask of confusion. "Sarge, does this mean—" "It means," Davis said, snapping the folder shut, "that this just got a hell of a lot more interesting." He turned and walked deliberately over to Brenda, who was watching this exchange with a look of smug impatience. Her triumphant expression began to falter as Davis approached, his entire demeanor having shifted from annoyed peacekeeper to officer of the law conducting official business. "Ma'am," Davis began, his voice calm but laced with steel, "I have some important information for you. I suggest you listen very carefully." Brenda crossed her arms. "I'm listening." "Ma'am, it turns out this tower," he said, pointing up the ridge, "is designated as part of the National Auxiliary Communications Service Network. According to the Federal Communications Act of 1934, and specifically FCC Regulation PRB-1, Mr. Carter here, as a federally licensed operator, has a legal right to access this facility for the purposes of maintenance and installation of communications equipment." Brenda just stared at him. "What? No, that's ridiculous. My HOA rules clearly state—" Davis held up a hand, and the authority in the simple gesture silenced her instantly. "Ma'am, this is the part you need to understand. Federal law preempts. That means it overrules your local HOA rules in this specific matter. Your rules are, legally speaking, irrelevant here." The color began to drain from Brenda's face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Davis wasn't finished. He leaned in just a fraction, lowering his voice. "Which means that right now, you are not just having a dispute with your neighbor. You are knowingly and intentionally obstructing a federally licensed operator from accessing what is considered critical communications infrastructure. That is a potentially serious federal offense. Are we clear?" The word federal hung in the air like a guillotine. Brenda looked at me, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. She looked at Miller, who just gave her a helpless shrug. She looked back at Davis, whose face was a granite mask of official seriousness. The comms Securi I had alluded to wasn't a private company with armed guards. It was right here, in the form of a tired cop patiently explaining the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution. It was the crushing, inescapable weight of the law, and it had just landed squarely on her. Davis checked his watch. "Ma'am, I am now giving you a lawful order. You have 30 seconds to move your vehicle and clear this gate. If you fail to comply, I will have your car towed at your expense, and we can discuss the finer points of obstructing a federal operation down at the station. It is entirely your choice." For a moment, I thought her pride might actually win out. She stood there, trembling, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, humiliation, disbelief. But then she looked at the grim, unblinking face of Sergeant Davis, and something inside her finally broke. Utterly, completely defeated, she turned without a word, walked to her Range Rover, and started the engine. With as much dignity as she could muster, which wasn't much, she pulled her car out of the way and parked it by the curb. The path was clear. I gave Sergeant Davis a sharp, grateful nod. He just shook his head, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smile. "Never a dull moment in Whispering Pines," he said. "Try not to cause any more federal incidents this week, okay, K1AXT?" "I'll do my best, Sergeant," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. As he and Miller got back in their cruiser and drove away, I turned to my crew. Gary was leaning against the fender of his truck, his face split by a wide, disbelieving grin. Kyle looked like he'd just seen a superhero landing. "Kid," Gary said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. "I've been climbing towers for 30 years. I've been threatened, shot at with rock salt, and had dogs sicked on me. But that was the most beautiful, glorious, cold-blooded thing I have ever seen." "Dude!" Kyle exclaimed, his eyes sparkling. "You went full-on legal ninja on her. You used the law. That was epic." We all started laughing. A wave of pure, giddy relief washed over me. I unlocked the gate, swung it open, and waved them through. As the big truck rumbled past and onto the dirt road, I glanced over at Brenda. She was still sitting in her car, staring straight ahead, her face a blank mask of humiliation. I gave her a cheerful little wave. She didn't wave back. The installation itself was anticlimactic in the best possible way. Gary and Kyle were pros. They had my new antenna mounted and the coax run in under 3 hours. They moved with an efficiency that was beautiful to watch. While they were up on the tower, I sat at the base with my equipment, carefully tuning the duplexer, a delicate task of tweaking tiny screws until the frequencies were perfectly isolated. By early afternoon, we were done. They packed up their gear, I shook their hands, and gave Gary a check with a hefty tip included. "Anytime, kid," Gary said, his good mood still holding. "Anytime you need to smite another HOA president with the power of the federal government, you give us a call." After they left, I was alone on the ridge. The air was cool and clean. I could see for miles. I connected my handheld radio to the newly installed system, took a deep breath, and pressed the transmit button. "Kilo 1 Alpha X-ray Tango, testing," I said into the mic. A moment of static, and then a voice came back, loud and perfectly clear. "K1AXT, you're coming in 5x9 here in Westlake. Where's your station at? You sound like you're next door." Westlake was 50 miles away. I grinned. "Just up on the ridge, my friend. Just enjoying the view." The project was a success. My repeater was online. A few weeks later, I was in my backyard, reclining in a lounge chair with a cold beer. The ARRL field day had come and gone. It was a spectacular success. Our club, using the new repeater, shattered all its old records. I'd spent 48 hours running on caffeine and adrenaline, talking to stations from Florida to Alaska, and it had been glorious. Sarah came out and handed me another beer, settling into the chair next to me. "So," she said with a sly smile, "heard from your girlfriend Brenda lately?" I laughed, taking a long sip. "Funny you should mention that. I got a very official-looking letter in the mail yesterday. From the Whispering Pines HOA, of course. a formal notice of violation for unauthorized antenna modifications visible from community spaces. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. You're kidding me! She's still at it? Oh yeah, I said, pulling the letter from my back pocket. It was practically steaming with passive aggression. So I did what any responsible citizen would do. I scanned it, attached it to a polite email explaining the concept of federal preemption for the 10th time, and forwarded the whole chain to a very helpful gentleman I found on the FCC's website, a Mr. Henderson, down in the Enforcement Bureau. You didn't? I did, I said, grinning. Haven't heard back from Brenda yet. Funny that. Sarah shook her head, laughing. You are an absolute menace, Alex Carter. Hey, I said, raising my bottle in a toast. I just wanted to talk on my radio. She's the one who decided to pick a fight with the United States government. I was just the humble messenger. I took a sip of my beer, the evening sun warm on my face. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. And from far away, from the top of the ridge, I imagined I could feel the faint, invisible, and victorious hum of my repeater, connecting people across the miles, a testament to the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, the nerdy, passionate, and well-prepared good guy actually gets to win. And man, did it feel good.